I'm more than happy to sort of explore in all sorts of different areas, but I find this is a kind of interesting way to look at it. For those of you who don't know me, I think most of you probably seen me talk before. I'm a consultant. I used to be an evangelist at Unity. I'm now a consultant. A company called Fundamentally Games. We help developers and investors understand the value of the game, and also help mentoring from pre-production to live ops. So I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes games successful and why. And essentially what I'm going to try and do is kind of help you with that kind of thought process. We're all looking for fun in the dark. It's if you think about it, we don't know what it is our game idea is going to be. We don't actually necessarily know whether there's an audience for that. And we're in a situation where we have to stand out. There is a massive number of people, and apologies to being John Malkovich here, but there's an amazing number of people out there with essentially very similar concepts. In fact, if you're spending your time making a game that you really like, again, because you want to make your version of it, you're already copying something anyway. So why should anyone buy the thing that you already know is based on something you already like? And the number of people who are trying to make the game that they really liked as kids, again, is huge. And it strikes me that there's kind of a fundamental broken problem there. And what makes it worse is not only do we have to stand out, we also have to keep people playing. The earlier panel, Mo was talking about this in particular with the day 1, day 7, day 30 way of looking at life. We don't, not only is there more content out there that we can physically play in our lifetime, think about that for a second, even on mobile alone, you could not live long enough to finish every game that is currently live. And you're going to make another game. And not only are you going to make another game, you're going to get people to play your game and keep playing your game for 30, 60, 90, 120, 365 days. Think about that's what the challenge we're really talking about is. And we're going to have to try and pay the bills. And whether your objective is to make games as art, or whether your objective is to make a billion-dollar product, isn't really relevant. At some point, you're going to have to get somebody to pay you money in the context that they can go somewhere else and do something else for free, because there's an infinite supply of content. There's an infinite amount of substitution, and all of the games that you love, I bet you somebody else has made another version of it already, probably hundreds of versions of that. Or if you really like Match 3, tens of thousands of versions of that. And when you make this thing, if you're not in love with it, and you don't stay in love with it, it's going to basically break. It's not going to work. You're not going to deliver the experience that people need. So that's kind of what the point of this process is. I want to give you 9 things you can take away that will give you a lens, a kind of way of looking at life that might help give you a little bit of a way of differentiating. The first thing is, what do you love that's not a game? Now think about that, okay? So why on earth, a stupid question, why on earth would you ask that? Well, if you think about what you love, let's say it's retro. Okay, so retro, who loves retro games? Anyone love retro games? That's what retro games look like. Actually, that was fun. On my, actually I can't remember which one that was, but if you think about 2600, or if you think the old, I had an Apple IIe and it was awesome, but that's the kind of game experience we're talking about then. That's what retro it really is. Who's going to buy that nowadays? Anyone? No one. Very few, because it's not actually retro we love. It's what we felt like when we played them. That's what we're trying to recreate. So actually understanding what it is you love properly is incredibly important, because that's what a pixel-based game looks like, and it's a dead pixel game, it's really fun. But that's not retro, it's reimagined nostalgia. So understanding what it is that you love and how you deliver it is fascinating, because you've got to stop and think differently. Now, I'm not saying don't do that, but there's lots of people doing that. Lots of people doing reimagined so-called 8-bit, 16-bit style graphics, which aren't really 8-bit or 16-bit graphics. They're actually something about reimagined nostalgia, I would argue. this is an example of thinking really differently. So there's this Polish company, Polish developer I know, who likes car mechanics. He likes, fiddling with car mechanics. He also likes pinball. And guess what he's made? He's made a car mechanic flipper game. It's freaking ridiculous. And it's amazingly fun. Now, how many competitor pinball car mechanic games are there in the market? I mean, seriously. I mean, there must be, no, obviously none. But look at that thing. I mean, I don't know if he's released it on mobile yet. He was going to, but it was like, oh my goodness me, now I understand what thinking differently is about. And actually, it's because he loves car mechanics, and he understands the components of that, but hasn't been captured by it. He hasn't been imprisoned by that. He's used it as a vehicle to communicate something differently and to play a game in a way that you'd never have thought of, which is brilliant. Next ridiculous question. Why will your players see your game in their dreams? Now, there's a certain game with bears called Triple Town. Anyone remember that? Anyone still dream of bears? I do. And even, with the Candy Crushes, I know people who still dream of it. And part of it is because the visual cortex is such an important part of our memory. And it's an important part of stimulus. And if we don't think about those kind of repetitive things that go on in the brain, actually, we're missing a massive opportunity, because what's the first thing you think of? Is that thing that you visualize. I'm going to go play Candy Crush because I visualize it and I will go play it. I mean, there's lots of other reasons why people play Candy Crush, mostly because they didn't know about other games at the time. Cool, that was good, wasn't it? So then there's this thing. He says, this game. He says, go. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. Anyone remember this? Counter-Strike. Now, it's worth noting that I still remember this map. The last time I played it was probably in 2003-ish. This is basically the same map that was in the original release of Counter-Strike that I was playing in '98. And my brain still remembers where the choke points are, even from this video alone. So it's not just about the kind of visual stimulation like we get from Triple Town. It's also when we build a model of the world that we're in a game as part of that process. What are you doing in your game that allows people's brains to completely absorb in that experience, so much so that they will visualize it and absorb themselves in it? The brain is an incredibly powerful part of what we do as game designers, and what makes people love things. How much time are you spending thinking about how people are going to absorb your gameplay and take on board that experience? I love this one. How do I make you hate this mechanic? This whole talk came out of a guy called Florian at Wooga, who's doing a talk in, I think, 2014 at GDC. He's a really good guy, and he gave me permission to build this. I mean, he didn't have to, but he was very nice. He was about it. His talk was about Jelly Splash, and it was all about basically the idea is that, well, let me put it this way. Some of you will get this and straight away, some of you won't. Go on, how many people know what that is? How many people have seen that in their nightmares? How many people have seen this for more hours than they played the darn game? Dark Souls is just, an incredible thing, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. In fact, actually, I wish I'd had an in-app purchase called Save Point. And I would have spent $1 a time. Now, I wouldn't use it all the time, don't get me wrong, but if I had a choice to be able to pay $1 the 53rd time, approximately, I died in that one space, I would have been happy, and I would probably have spent over $1,000. And happily. Now, I mean, the thing is about tension of that kind of frustration of that experience, that love and hate are tied together. I'll give you another example, which isn't quite so extreme. How many people have got to the final boss and then realised, I've got to go fight it a second time, and then eventually worked out, I've got to fight it a third time, and I can't go repair. This is an insane game. I love it. I hate it. I love it. This whole idea, though, is of realising the not just thinking of this as a moment. Games are journeys. Games are flows. Games need texture and tonality. They need pace. They need frustration. All of these tools, if we do not create a model of play which makes people feel so annoyed and frustrated that they have to play it again, and then when they succeed, it is a massive triumph, have we really provided the emotional experience players want? So if you want people to pay attention to your game and to stay playing your game, and you don't understand the role of challenge and frustration, what are you doing making a game? This is my most painful problem. I hate cutting features. In fact, I actually found a trick where I never have to cut a feature again, but I'll talk about it in a bit. So I'm a kind of designer where I put every possibility of how the game mechanic is on the page to start with, because I want to know how could you use a mechanic and see all the things you could do to increase and extend it and replay it, because I want to know how I can make it a really amazing experience. How many people have played a Swiss Army knife game? Actually, I'll give you an example. One of the things I think is a Swiss Army knife game was Assassin's Creed Unity. There were so many side missions, I couldn't find where the main mission was anymore, and got completely lost. And it was unplayable for me. I think some people liked it. I didn't like it. I'm a big Assassin's Creed fan. But the point is that we can't have a Swiss Army knife approach. We have to focus. And if you actually take something away, you can actually get something more interesting. Now think about this. What is Portal if it's not a first-person shooter where you take killing out of it? First-person shooter, you can't kill people. Portal. So imagine if you break the technique we learned at Sony. Take a game, define it into 6 parts. Well, any number of parts you've got a dice for, but 6 is quite handy. So 6 parts, I've got a gun, tick. I've got an environment, I can take damage, I can kill people, I use ammunition. And let's take out that you can kill people. Really fascinating how that makes a new game. So if you're really trying to work out what makes your game special, don't think about what you can add, think about what you can take away. Another example, tower defense games. I love tower defense games, but if you think about it, a tower defense game is basically a real-time strategy game where you can't move the environment. If you put it down to that simple kind of way of looking at it, you can see how new genres can be evolved by taking your favorite games and taking things away from them. So what happens if you take your favorite feature? And actually, I'm at the stage now where I got this from a guy called Matthew who used to work at King. What happens if you keep taking away features? And you keep taking them away until the game stops functioning as a game. And then you put that one back. If you think about that, stripping games away to their purest quality, what is Adventure Capitalist or any of the clicker games if it's not a gameplay mechanism stripped back to its barest bones? What's the game in a clicker game? It plays for you. They should not work, but they do. And they do because they spend time stripping away what wasn't needed to make the game interesting and focusing on where the value proposition was of playing the game, what the utility was for the player. And they've become an incredibly successful genre. How can I stop a player from playing? That does sound insane, doesn't it? Why would you want to do that? Anyone know why you want to do that? Come on, someone's going to know. Or have I got you to the post, pre-lunch kind of coma? So I'll explain. Because you don't want them to burn out. You don't want this. He says. No. You don't want your player to look like that. completely exhausted by the frenetic pace of your game. One of the examples I try and use, and particularly this applies to mobile. If I've got a bus to catch, or frankly, the honest answer is I'm probably on the loo, do I want to start a game I know is going to take 15 minutes to play? Or 20 minutes to play? Or will I choose a game that's going to have 1.5 million play session? I probably choose the latter. I probably choose the faster turnaround. But I probably will still spend 15 minutes because I keep pressing replay. Even though I'm spending the same amount of time playing the game, the fatigue level isn't there because I have this constant opportunity to break free, so I don't burn out. People burn out. It becomes daunting if you have this enormous commitment you're going to have to make. I mean, think about console games. Some of my least favourite moments are something like, I think it was Watch Dogs? Well, all of the Final Fantasies in the modern era, but let's say Watch Dogs for now. I counted 4.5 minutes where I pressed X about 20 times before I actually started playing the game. That's fun, isn't it? Didn't you feel really satisfied when you sit for 4.5 minutes pressing the X button? Do you want to do that? I certainly don't. And it's actually hugely depressing. And there's certain games I won't try anymore because I know it's going to take me ages to get started. And unless you think about that kind of question, how do I keep people from playing? Well, but I should say this thing: you've got to get them to still enjoy it and give them something for coming back. The thing doesn't have to be rewards or whatever, although that helps. But why should they anticipate? Why should they plan to come back to your game? Remember what we said earlier? There's an infinite supply of content out there, more than you can possibly play. So you've got to give them a reason to come back to yours. I actually think this is a really fundamental problem for shared room multiplayer games, local multiplayer games, particularly share screen ones. Because why would somebody remember to pull out that game at that time when everyone's around, when it's so much more easy to go and do something else? Why don't we create appointments, moments that encourage people to want to play that game right now? So that's kind of the flip side of this. It's like, we need to stop people from burning out, but equally we've got to give people a reason to come back and play. This is a bit cruel. In fact, I'm going to go straight to this picture. What's the worst thing to deny your player? Now, some people think I'm evil because I want to kind of think about this, but I think it's actually important because if you think about what your player really cares about, that's the only real way I think you can understand where the value is in your game. If you're going to create, particularly free-to-play experiences, and you don't know what your player cares about, you can't make a good experience. But you're not making a mousetrap. You're not trying to punish people. There's a friend of mine who works at Future Play, and he talks about never give a video ad a point where someone's failed, because it feels like a tax. It's a way of basically reinforcing how badly you've done. Only give these opportunities to spend, he thinks, when there's positive experiences and emotions, because we want to reinforce positivity. It should be a good thing to want to spend money in a game, which sounds like it's at odds with this idea of working out what's the worst thing to deny your player, but actually I don't think it is. I think it's the same thing. If we know what players truly value, if we know how we can encourage them to want to use it, and we can make them feel good about it, we get repeat purchase. A lot of people talk about KPIs like ARPU and LTV and all that kind of stuff. I actually think the most important, from a monetization point of view, KPI is repeat purchase. Because frankly, if you haven't got repeat purchase, your monetization sucks. And it's a failure. Repeat purchase is a much misunderstood value in terms of your experience. Because if you can actually encourage people to like what they do when they buy, and that makes their gameplay more enjoyable, because you focused on the utility for those players, then actually you can have a much better success. You don't want to be sat in the situation where you're basically saying, buy now or the teddy bear gets it. Another one, question 7. So we're nearly there. What will keep your players from checking their phone? Think about that. What will keep your players from checking their phone? And it's that classic thing, I don't know if you remember the BlackBerry, the whole idea that we had to check. Some of you were probably too young, probably that age at the time, and the BlackBerry was a thing. Maybe not. But we had this kind of, you call it the crackberry because it was like some sort of addiction. We had to go check it every time. We still have it nowadays, to a certain extent. Yeah. And we can actually, that little light was such a, and we still have the mode. We can switch it on and off, But I remember I had to have a BlackBerry when I was at Sony, and it was like the worst thing I've ever had to have. And it really, I'm sure my workaholism is driven directly from that. But actually, there is a point to it. It was useful to know that somebody had messaged me. In fact, the worst thing on that era was the realization that it wasn't flashing. When my phone wasn't flashing, it means no one was paying attention to me. So, it's a kind of interesting one. So why would people check your game? Because at the end of the day, back to that point earlier about getting people to come out, and read a break and feel like the natural opportunities to stop playing. It's just as important to know that there's reasons to go in. And something is happening in the game that I want to pay attention to. If nothing is going to happen in the game that you should pay attention to, why should they go back? It's why updates are so important, why content releases are so important. If nothing happens to your game is dead. If your game is dead, why would anyone go into it? So thinking about kind of, creating those experiences, leaving footprints in the sand to say, I was here. That's one of the, I think for me, the fundamental thing that the Facebook era games really opened my eyes to was the fact that it didn't have to be real-time presence of other people. Just the fact that somebody else was there that got the highest score, and so on and so forth. And the sense of an unfinished business. I've left a game and I've not completed the thing that I should have been doing, that I was enjoying doing. That's an incredible motivator. In fact, my favourite example of this is a game, it's a few years old now, but Kim Kardashian. Do you remember the Kim Kardashian game? Anyone play the Kim Kardashian game? Anyone spend money in the Kim Kardashian game? I did. About $100. Seriously. It was great. I loved it because I had to finish off doing my makeup before I got the coffee, before I then did the photo shoot. Because if I did it, then I would get the Twitter ratings and I'd get the better boyfriend. Now, I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not. Because the way it was flawed in various ways, don't get me wrong. But what it did was absolutely refined for me as a designer the role of unfinished business. I like to call it the hot dog theory. It's quite commonly talked about. The whole idea about, you buy hot dog buns in 6s and you buy hot dogs in 8s. This whole idea that it's never quite finished. You always have to have more of one or more of the other. You're always left with a pool of one and not the other, and the thing that you've got inspires you to want to go get the next thing. They're all connected theories. But this sense of, I had to go back in, because there was never enough action points in Kim Kardashian, I had to go back in order to complete the photo shoot, in order to get the reward. And if I didn't, all that effort I put in was lost. So I knew I had to come back in when I had more energy, or, frankly, spend money. So I did. Do I resent that? No. Because it was good. It was valuable. So I think that's an important. Next one. Question 8. How do I make the other players jealous? A lot of people talk about kind of like consumable goods and things, but actually we should remember skill is an important factor. How do I know that I've got skill or patience? Actually, patience and persistence is as important in some ways as skill. The number of people in PlayStation Home when I was working on that wanted to show off their dedication just by turning up regularly. They would have groups who would turn up in a space in a red outfit with an afro wig, and the wig was red. And they would all do that regularly just to show that they were part of the fan base. In fact, my favourite one was the gold suit. I don't know if anyone was in the room when Catherine was in earlier. We had people who had 60 people. You'd only have 60 people in a space. And they would arrange spaces so that all 60 were in the gold suit with the money coming out the pockets and doing the Cabbage Patch dance. What's the fun in that? And yet, when you do it, and you're amongst those 60 people, if you're one of those 60 people, your social identity, the in-group that you're part of, is incredibly bonding, exciting, and satisfying. So skill is one thing, belonging is another thing. How do I make people feel, if they're out of the group that they could be in, and that that's valuable? How do you make that work for your game? But of course, there is something in that whole I have more money. Anyone remember the I Am Rich app on the iPhone? I mean, ridiculous. Why would anyone spend $1,000 just to have a picture that says, I just spent $1,000? I mean, people did. I mean, it got banned, obviously, but, you know, there is a psychological need to show off. None of that happens if you don't actually show people what that person has. If you have a game experience with customization and no one else can see what you've bought, why would they? So the ability to show off that experience that I do through skill, through persistence, through spend, has to be socialized. And nowadays, make me famous. We have a situation where our audience has an audience. We're not making a game just for players anymore. We're making a background for entertainers and who use our experience as a vehicle. This is an interesting one, because I change my questions around every once in a while, so this is a recent update. Who owns the game? You know, think about that for a second. Is it you as the developer? Or is it some faceless investor? Or money man or bank? Do they own or the publisher maybe? Is it the players? Do the players own the game? Or is it increasingly a community experience which is wider and bigger than us? And I think one of the things I learned from doing these big online community experiences, the moment you release the game, it's not yours anymore. It's owned by the audience. And understanding that process and being prepared to surrender your control, but actually embracing that as a positive, actually taking that forward, becomes an incredibly interesting space. Which is why I think it's worth, every once in a while, just stepping back and thinking about who owns your game. Now, I've got a bit of a bonus one. What does it mean to own a game? And I think in the context of, you know, the other track that's going on at the moment, it's worth mentioning blockchain. Now, I'm not telling you that blockchain is necessarily the next big thing. I know the people in the other room will. I happen to be a bit of a fan, and I'll explain why. But I think the question that it asks us is worth having, whether you're going down this route or not. What does it mean to own a game is now very different than it once was. Owning a physical good is one thing. A Blu-ray disc in a box is one thing. We don't do that anymore. Well, they do, but not very often. Owning digital assets inside, games we have on our phone, which is software which we can delete and then reinstall, all digitally delivered, that's another thing. Assets within that digital game, do we own them, or do we lease them, or do we just get them as part of consumption? And then when you get to something like blockchain, what I find interesting about it is, what convinced me about it was this idea that actually, here is a way to make a digital asset uniquely identifiable. Uniquely identifiable in a way that I can actually add history to that asset. And I think, the reason I'm interested in it is because I'm working on a game called Reality Clash, and we designed a weapon token. So we designed a bit of JSON that would allow us to say, hang on, what is the information that we could use? How could we make this a distributed experience so that anyone could come along and own this thing, and regardless of whether we're involved or not, could actually use it for themselves, which I find fascinating. So we gave it a unique serial number. So there are guns with the serial number of 007 out there already being bought. We've got a game API call inside the JSON, so that anyone using that another game could go and do a call, and we can provide all the server data we've got for our game to them. but we've also built in public data that defines the relative capacity of that weapon inside the token. So you don't even have to check our data. You can do a top trumps type experience just by saying, what's the handling of that weapon? What's the stability? What's the damage? What's the range? And not have to touch us in any way. And the idea of then using the smart contract to define how that can be amended. So for example, we're planning to put things like every kill that you get playing our game, we'll add to the history of that unique weapon. And I hope that makes that thing more interesting and more valuable to people. But I'd love to get to the situation where we find other people with other games who want to use our weapons. I have no idea whether we can make that happen, but that's what I'd like to happen. Because if we could then give them an API call to send us data that we can verify that says how many kills that they got on that game, or how many uses, headshots, whatever it might be, wouldn't it be interesting to have a shared experience with that piece of data? That one weapon was used in these circumstances with these results. I think that's really fascinating. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The number of ideas that come out of that, and it's not without challenges. It's got massive challenges, even down to the extent where if it works at scale, how do we have enough power in the world to be able to run the servers needed to validate the activity that people want to do? There is genuinely a concern over whether we have not just the computing power, but the capacity to generate the actual energy power if this were to scale to an enormous level. But I think it opens a wider question, which I think is worth thinking about, is what does ownership mean in this digital world? And with that in mind, these are my questions. I think if you, hopefully you've taken from this ways of saying, actually, you need to work out what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and what it means to own a game. And on that note, thank you very much.